what are kind of the relationships that we have with people? How do we express kind of that gospel way of life and the love that Christ shows for others, and try to be witnesses to that? If you create something that's brilliant but nobody ever uses it, then what's the point? This drives my students crazy, but I always love it. I don't call them tests or exams, but they're learning opportunities.
My dear brother Casey,
Tito,
we are in a wonderful time of year, one of my favorite times of year, the only time of year that I care about college basketball.
You do realize that this episode is not going to air for 3 weeks after this, but
yes, yes, and this is going to be the fun of it. We say now who we think is going to win, and and in 3 weeks we'll know the answer.
I want to do what they did in 30 Rock, where I just go, and then we dub it over in 3 weeks.
I mean, if you want to go with that, go for it. I'm going to give you my prediction.
Okay, go for it.
Florida, the Gators, baby. They've got a good shot of it this year, and I'm very excited.
I just filled out my bracket 20 minutes ago. I know I had them going kind of far. I think I have them losing to Michigan State, though, because
Michigan State.
I can't go against Michigan State in March. So
they have Florida has no.
Don't talk to me about basketball. I don't know anything about it. So you're not going to win any argument.
Better record. They've played stronger teams. Come on.
This is logic that I don't use when I go into March Madness. I think I have Alabama winning, and I can't tell you a single thing about Alabama other than they're a 1 seed or a 2 seed. I think they're a 2 seed.
Alabama is, yes, they're a 2 seed. Houston is a 1 seed in their section.
Houston, yeah.
Yeah.
So I will say, and I will go on record for this, the only thing I have strong convictions for is that UNC will win one game.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I'm not talking the play-in game. They won that last night, 2 nights ago.
Okay.
I think because of all of the, rightly so, that they were not deserving to be in the tournament, that they've got an everyone's against us mentality.
That's possible.
They almost beat Duke. They went on a little bit of a run. I think they're going to have a little bit of motivation, but I could eat my words in 3 weeks.
That's very possible. They are seated lower. We'll see. We'll see how they go.
They're arguably terrible. I mean, they've had one win against a tier 1 team, so yeah. I'm going with it. Go Classic. They're gonna rise to the occasion.
I think one of my brackets does predict that because I'm like, they've been there before, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, gosh, these are scary things. I remember listening to a podcast, one of the ones I listened to, where they were talking about October and the World Series, but they recorded it in August because one of their co-hosts was leaving for maternity leave. So they did it really, really early.
Yeah.
And it was hilarious how wrong they were about everything. So I hope we're not in the same boat.
Same.
Alabama doesn't lose in the first round or something.
Agreed. Same with Florida. Well, today's guest is someone who probably has some sort of algorithm or some sort of formula to kind of predict who's going to win at the end of this tournament.
Yeah.
So with all that, Jimmy Kernan, how you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Jimmy, how are we doing? How are we calculating this? Please tell me. Do you have an algorithm? Do you have a formula, a system?
I don't. As much as I'd like to and spend the time on going through the numbers, I think something that we've probably seen year to year is it doesn't always work too well. So I try to go on gut feelings, and my big philosophy is when I used to take this very seriously is conference tournaments were always really important to how I pick teams. I remember I was doing a pool with my friends some years ago, and I was in college at the time, just watching conference tournament games during the day, and I watched Marshall kick the crap out of somebody during their conference tournament, to win their conference tournament. They get in, they're a 13th seed. I was like, that team's winning a game. And I was the only one in the pool to pick them, and so that's always a big philosophy.
You got a little bit of a process.
Yeah.
So you're a scientist, but a pragmatist because you're like, this is impossible. It's not worth my time. I'm going to devote, my scientific and mathematical skills to, solving the environment and not a futile task
to
of
the good of the world. And I think there's a lot of benefit to sports, and I think they're really good for kind of culture, bringing people together. And I always love this time of year because it brings people together to kind of talk about something collectively that even if you don't have a lot of interest in it, you try to find a way to participate in it. And it's always exciting to kind of see that. And there's always the person who is in your pool that knows absolutely nothing about basketball, they're
Sure, yeah,
picking
that's me.
teams of like, oh, I like this team's colors, and
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
they somehow end up at the top, like winning the entire thing. And
I don't like cougars. I'd prefer birds.
yeah,
No, I told this to my sister. So she sends me an email from her work where somebody from she works at a school. She's an administrator, and one of the counselors put together a pool on CBS's website, and they're like, oh yeah, if you want to participate, it's $10. Immediate family can participate. So my sister forwards me the link. She goes, hey, can you help me out with this? And I was like, great, I've got a bracket ready to go. She goes, no, I want you to help me. And I said, pick whoever you want because I'm gonna lose. And I've seen people win who are like, I like these mascots or I like these colors. I just told her, I was like, trust me, like it's hard to predict.
I love one of the most diabolical things I saw. I think it was in college, and there was like a boyfriend girlfriend doing it, and she asked the guy like, help me do this. What she did was copied his bracket completely except for 2. And she got those 2 right, which meant she was guaranteed to beat him. Which I think is just great strategy.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. And then if you end up losing, you only lost by a couple, so
That's
you kept
right,
it
yeah.
close. So that's
Sort of hedge your bets. So who you got? Do you have a bracket? You got someone that you're gunning for?
So I have a bracket, filled it out, went through the whole process, and get to the end, and it's like, how did I get here? Like, sometimes you get to your final 4, and you're like, how did I end up here? And in both the brackets that I've done, I have Duke winning, which pains me. And
It makes
part
sense.
of it is I try to be supportive of my brothers here at Siena. There's a couple Duke graduates in the house, and so we watch a lot of their games and try to be supportive, but they've also just been phenomenal this year. And
Yeah, I mean, they are really, really good. They could have been the number 1 seed. I filled it out partially in front of my students today, and I did it just for effect. I said, well, we have to do what I always do. I picked Duke to win the first round, and then I picked Duke to lose the second round. And they started booing me, like, what's wrong with you? I was like, every year I have to have them losing in the second round.
Yeah,
Wow.
I try to do that as much as possible, but it's like growing up in Syracuse, so I grew up watching Syracuse go into the ACC transition, and us like automatically, like all other schools in the ACC, hating Duke as much as possible. And
As you do.
it's so it was painful, but I'm also playing to win this year, and I thought that was my best chance. And
Well, now you do something interesting in your house, right? So you have a house of 20 or so people, which is fun. You guys do a bracket, but it's different. Explain what you guys do.
yeah, so we have a bracket here. Father Julian, God bless him,
How old is
92
Julian?
years old, runs the whole show, collects all the brackets, takes care of everything. And the system that I think he was the origin of this and came up with the system is there's basically 2 brackets, 2 winners that happen. And the first kind of bracket we go through is the first weekend. So you pick all the games for the first weekend, and then whoever is the winner out of that is the first winner. And then when the Sweet 16 happens, we all kind of get the second chance thing. So see who's in the Sweet 16, and then pick on from there. So
that
after
changes
seeing
the
first
strategy.
games.
So you're not going to be picking upsets then, because sometimes you're thinking longevity and, all right, this 7 seed, I think they're going to go kind of far, and I'm going to gain points if they win in the end. I'm going to risk it. Oh, well, if I miss the first one, fine. But with that, you kind of want to pick mostly favorites, right?
Yeah, I think it would kind of go that way. I picked a few upsets. I always lean on kind of the very few things and clips that I hear from different sports media. And I know one team's being talked about is Drake this year. It's like they have a really interesting story. It's like, I'll pick them to win a game, and hopefully we'll see them go on, and we'll see what happens. And
It was like my alma mater 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
yes.
Furman beat UVA in the first round. I picked that. I picked them to win 2 games. They couldn't get past whoever, Arizona State or whoever the next
Right.
one was.
Mm-hmm.
But
I tend to look at momentum. I look at who's, the last 7 or 8 games, and I'm like, how is this team doing? How's that team doing? Because there are some teams that get a high seed because they performed really well at the beginning and the middle of the season, but then towards the end they kind of started to fizzle, and they're going up against a smaller school that has incredible momentum at the end. It's hard to predict because you got one school who's played against big competitive teams, another school that hasn't played against as many competitive teams, but their momentum's going in different directions, and I don't know. I try to create some sort of synergy from that.
Yeah, I use that as well. Like I try to conference tournament games, if I'm watching some kind of low conference final and watching a team play like incredible, I'll usually go for them in a first round game, and then maybe even two. We'll see who the matchup is, but I think that's always a great picking strategy. And
Well,
it's
we
worked
can't
for
wait
me
to see
in
in
the
a
past.
couple weeks how wrong we are. So lest
very
we make
excited
this
to see
podcast
that.
completely irrelevant,
Right.
Let's talk about you a little bit, because we can stick to universities. You've been in universities quite a bit, and you're currently at one as well. Not as a student, which some people might assume based on your age, but you're a teacher now.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Yeah, so I'm at Siena College here in beautiful Loudonville, New York, and I'm in the Department of Physics and Astronomy here. So I teach a couple of classes in the department. I teach our life science majors their general physics class, and then I also teach an energy and environment class for part of the core curriculum. So I have a lot of business students in that class, some poli-sci, and then some environmental studies end up in that class too. It's kind of a whole mixed bag, which is a lot of fun to have that group. But talk about like different energy systems, and that's where a lot of my interest is. So it's a lot of fun sharing with them in that class.
Cool.
So how old are you?
I'm 26 years old.
26. Is that difficult teaching 18, 19, 20-year-olds where you're not too far away from them?
No, they think I'm old.
Professor equals old.
And no, I was here. I do a lot of things around campus, and people joke to me. They're like, "You're kind of everywhere all the time." And I try to be involved in different things. Like I'm a Friar resident, so I live in one of the dorms. I work with. We have a Center for Integral Ecology, our Laudato Si Center on campus. So I work with that group with a couple other friars and a bunch of student assistants. So I'm kind of plugged in. But I was in the dorm one night, and I just stopped by. Some of the students were hanging out, and they're chatting about something. And then like the story like shakes me so much because it's the first time it's really ever happened to me in my life. I don't even remember what we were talking about.
No. Yeah.
And then one of the students just looks me dead in the eye. They're like, "Well, Brother Jimmy, like, you don't get this. Like, you're so much older than we are."
Oh my gosh.
And then I was like, "How old do you think I am?" And they're like, "Probably like 27." So I was like, "Oh."
Oh no, so they were right, and they still
So
thought
how
you were old.
right they were.
Right.
That they're like, "You're so much older than we are." Then I had to think about it. It's like about 10 years difference. And for 17, 18-year-olds, like it's a big gap.
Sure. Yeah, and you think of yourself somewhat as a peer sometimes. You're not too far removed. Like, hey, I know stuff. I just went through this.
Right.
I will say the most. It just hurt the most. I've had lots of different experiences like that, but the one that the students use a lot is they'll say, "Yeah, but you were born in the 1900s."
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Little bastards.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
I hate whoever came up with that trend, honestly. Like, for people old, I don't remember what it was. It was a sound on TikTok, though, for all the old people out there, like people born in the 1900s, and I was just like, "Excuse me?"
Fighting words.
And that was like
Respect your
5 years
elders.
ago.
yeah, that's it's always a tough thing. So it's amazing. Like that's one thing. Like coming here and talking about friars and like getting it. Like when you go to new places, you kind of sit with the friars and they give you advice and they kind of give you the rundown on how places operate, and they try to help you with the transition. And a lot of them point like, yeah, like this might be tough. Like you're kind of close in age to them, and like that could be an advantage. And then I get here and start talking to the students. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're old." Like, and it's like, okay, like something I thought that might have been an interesting thing, and is they're like, "Yeah, you're just old." And it's
I
like,
had the
okay.
same experience. Not so much that they were forthright in calling me old, but that I felt a little different. My first assignment, I was 30 years old, and I was at University of Georgia. So they were 19, 20, 22. I was 30. I was like, "Oh, I just went through this recently. We're like the same people. I can relate to you." And then I got there. I was like, "Oh, we are not. These kids are mature. They have different focuses. They're interested in different things." There's no worry about any blurred boundaries, whether that be emotional or physical. Like, I don't see you as a peer. This is not the same.
Yeah.
That's true.
Getting here was a lot easier than I expected it to be, from at least like that standpoint of, because I mean, as ministers, like we have to set those boundaries a little bit in sense of like professional relationships and ministerial relationships, and my age, like it's like that could be a challenge, but it ended up being a little bit easier than I thought.
And the reality is, in a lot of ways, not in every way, but in a lot of ways, it's a matter of perspective, right? Because I was literally where you are just a year ago, and there were times where I was hanging out with students and I felt young, and there were times where I was hanging out with them and I feel old now. But there were also times where I'm hanging out with other friars. We're talking about different things. I remember we were talking about solar panels one time, and I was saying we should really look into this, and someone was like, oh yeah, we looked into it and it's just not efficient. And I was like, when'd you look into it? Like, 20 years ago. And I was like, if someone
Funny
was
thing about technology.
right, if someone was giving you advice on a car to buy and their last experience of a car was 20 years ago, would you listen to them? So yeah, it's like, and it's just a matter of perspective. Like for them, that was just a few years ago. For me, I'm like, I was in my teens still. So
Well, isn't that the way it starts to work as you get older? I mean, I think, college wasn't that so long ago, and I look at my high schoolers, I'm twice their age.
right,
Like, oh no, I actually shouldn't be giving like real specific advice for college because I don't know how college works anymore.
Right.
It continues to change a little bit, so you do start to feel like, I should probably update my information. It's not as relevant as I thought. And that's probably why working with young people is very helpful and why a lot of people like it. Jimmy, you were there to teach, but you could have taught anywhere. I think you have an interest in being with young people. Is there something that you're learning along the way, or is there an interest of why you're there?
I really like working around college students. I love the kind of college atmosphere, and the flow of college life is something that I really enjoy. And it's what we were kind of talking about this yesterday, is especially in a place like this ministry, like it would be impossible to give someone like me a time card of like our life.
I think we all understand
just
that.
kind of has some like this really like natural flow, and you're out and about and all these different things, and I really just love getting so many different perspectives from students who work in so many different areas of. I really enjoy that I teach non-majors, so I teach students who are mostly biology majors in one particular section, then teach students who like the business background, and it's like, okay, like I come with the science and we're going to talk about that, but like, okay, so you as people who would look in business and who might go into a business like this, what do you think? Like, what are you seeing? Like, what are the challenges? And so like I'm learning so much just from students, their experiences and their backgrounds, and then just all the different students I interact with. In touch with so many like really talented art students here, so they do so many great projects, and seeing the stuff that they work on, and just students in all different parts of the campus life, and it's just a really great experience to see such the variety of student that we have here, and being able to learn from them a lot of like kind of how they see the world. I know that's the world is in a kind of challenging and probably like shifting place in a lot of ways. So kind of seeing where they are, and that is really being the leaders of these next generations, and as they kind of come up and enter the world and the workforce in a bunch of different areas, it's kind of how are they seeing this, and how can we help them grow into that, and make them kind of like great leaders for the future. So I think that's a lot of the great work that we get to do
It's
here.
interesting to talk about that non-major part.
Yeah.
Because I think as an outsider, I might think, well, I got my PhD in science and I want to teach science people and I want to do the elite stuff. But I suspect that it's really interesting because I took a science class for non-majors, and it was so much more practical. It wasn't the theory of science. It wasn't memorize the whole periodic table. It was, here's what happens if you put things in liquid nitrogen. Here's how science was used in movies. Here's like hands-on, like you feel like you're in kindergarten for college a little bit. But I could tell the teacher liked it a lot because it had a lot of social dimensions. It had a lot of practical things. Like we read an article one time about a guy who got a DUI from drinking Listerine. And that's how we learned that Listerine has 17% alcohol in it. And you can definitely get drunk on it.
that seems harsh on the stomach.
Yeah,
Not a great idea.
No.
Yeah.
No, I agree, and I'm curious. Since you're teaching non-majors and people from not just not from a science major, but from different disciplines, do you find that they approach the problems or the questions that you ask differently, and do they ask different kinds of questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I know there's one guy, he's great. He's a history major, so he's kind of always looking at the historical perspective. And we just wrapped up recently a unit on nuclear energy, so he was talking about like kind of the historical movements and the creation and kind of the development of nuclear energy across the world and how it was different in different places. So like he brought that in and talked about some of that, where some guys in business, I raised the question of like, well, what if Siena needs to look at our energy and like we want a new energy supply? Like, how about we build a nuclear power plant across the street?
Ooh,
and
I'm sure everyone would love that.
So it was like all the different perspectives that came out of that, of like all the business majors were like, how much will that cost? or what's the cost benefit of doing something like that? And then
the poli-sci people,
the
what
poli-sci
coalitions
people,
do
like,
I have? What support?
Yeah. How are they with this like environmental kind of studies and science group of like, is that the best idea? Like, what do we do with all of the waste? Like, where's that going? Like, do we have the resources around here to do that? So it was really fun to see kind of presenting them with a scenario and seeing all the different parts of it work out. So I have them working on a project as well, and I very intentionally put them in groups of 4 where they all have 4 different backgrounds. And it's
nice.
kind of this idea of how do you create maybe a sustainable campus, and looking at Siena in particular.
And how do you include art? I mean, everyone talks about STEM, but I'm a big believer in STEAM.
Yes.
Because, and my biggest example is, this is what the Cybertruck gets you if you don't have art. You need aesthetics, you need beauty, you need more than just functionality. And granted, that doesn't have much functionality either.
Right.
But there's something to, how does this make my life more beautiful that is important?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I always think like beauty is such a important part, and I think it's so fundamental in our tradition. You look at kind of how Francis talked about this, how Bonaventure talked about the SCOTUS, and like some of those early kind of voices in our tradition. Like beauty was so important to them and such at the forefront, and even in like kind of these new traditions of Siena. We're very fortunate. We just had a new science building open this semester, and a lot of the design was about incorporating our tradition into it, the Franciscan tradition, but instilling a sense of beauty that comes in science as well. So it's always good to see those parts of it, because some of the stuff that we talk about with, do we do solar, do we do wind, is, well, what does that do to the landscape in the area? And that's often one of the bigger arguments against some of those projects, or that the resistance to those projects. And I think there's some like the validity
Matrix
in it. It's,
not the Matrix itself, but like those farms. It's functional. It's very, very efficient. It's scientific and computerized. But man, it's awful. It doesn't have any human element to it.
Yeah. So there's always kind of that side of it, and we talk about how do we get creative, maybe with some of those things. I know there's my alma mater, St. Bonaventure University, just down the road from there. There's the site of a factory, and it's still somewhat operational, and the old Dresser-Rand factory there. But part of the land there is a solar field now, and it's actually a great use of the land because of the factory and things that were dumped on that area at some point. It can't be used for anything else. So it's like, how do we maybe get creative with, is there land that maybe was polluted at one point, it's not like livable, we can't build on it, but but we can get energy out of it. It's just kind of sitting there. And so there's always kind of interest with how can we maybe get creative about some of this stuff. So it's a lot of fun with the students to ask these questions and kind of poke and prod them to think about some of these things. And really like that, even in science, that's often seen as like, everything's black and white, and it's like it's this or it's that, and like there is some element of that in like some of the, like 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4, and there's like the equations. But my background has kind of shifted into engineering a little bit, and there's that side of it of how does this get implemented, how does this get used in the world, like what are the community applications of this, and what's their kind of stance on it. And it's always that idea of, if you create something that's brilliant but nobody ever uses it, then what's the point? And
Might not actually be brilliant. Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
So what got
exactly.
you into this? You're focused on energy, maybe engineering. Does it relate to your Franciscan tradition, to your identity as a friar?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like the idea of the whole story. So when I started looking at colleges when I was in high school, I remember I was on my way to a college fair and at the community college that was nearby me. And I'm in the car with my mom, and she's just like, well, have you thought about what you wanted to study? And I was like, well, a little bit, but not too much. I was like, I really have been enjoying physics this year. And so I was like, okay, well, let's go and let's just see what's there and talk to people who have physics programs and stuff. And so that's what I went on. And it's kind of really fun I was enjoying the class, but it was just like a month or two into it at that point to where I am now. It's just like, oh, like I made that kind of snap decision, like based on a question, as I was like a minute away from pulling into this college fair to talk to admissions counselors. And I haven't turned
Discernment
back
advice from Jimmy Garvin.
from it.
Yep.
Yes, make a snap decision and never turn back.
Stick to it.
Well, what I love about, like, the fact that you're interested in science, you're studying it, and now you're teaching it, is I think the media has done a great job of perpetuating a myth that there's a division between religion and science, right, or faith and science. And don't get me wrong, some denominations are hostile towards science, but there isn't an inherent division between faith, religion, and science. I took a chemistry course last semester, and it was on fermentation and brewing and stuff like that.
How
And
typical.
the professor was telling us about a particular fungus that can be used in fermentation, and he says this is called aspergillus. And as soon as I heard aspergillus, I'm like, that was a priest. That was a priest who found that. And so I Googled it, and sure enough, I don't know, it didn't say what religious order, but he was a priest who was, it was the early days of magnification, and he was looking at different funguses under microscopes, and he's like, it looked like an aspergus. And so that's, as soon as I saw the shape, I'm like, that's an aspergus. He called it aspergillus because of that. And so I told the professor afterwards, he's like, oh, I didn't know. And so he started looking at a lot of other things and realizing, oh, wow, the Catholic Church was really involved in the discovery of microbiology and fermentation and brewing and other forms of decomposition early on in the science. And so he was kind of intrigued
Because
by
we
that.
like to drink, first and foremost. But second, because we recognize that God is the creator of all things.
Yep.
And so we can find God, and God's fingerprints are everywhere. So this idea that science and religion are separate, or that one disproves the other, is very much not our take.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's fun. It's a question I get frequently, and being in the field and talking with people, especially my time in Chicago when I was a student doing my master's in molecular engineering there. And it's just very fun, the conversations I got to have, because like I'd be at school, I'd often have my habit on and would just enter in these conversations about like, oh, like when I first started with a lot of my cohort, they're just like, okay, what the heck does this, like your Franciscan life, have to do with what we work on here? And talk about like, well, first we have an 800-year tradition of doing this, or nearly 800-year tradition of doing scientific thought, and you can go back to Roger Bacon.
You're
an
welcome,
early
world.
Franciscan friar, and some of his contributions, and really out of the School of Oxford. At that time made some very early contributions to our modern kind of scientific processing and thought and experimentation. And then also I was like, the things that scientists do and are working on now are very deeply important to us. Of like, care for creation is something very deeply important to us, and one of the ways that we do that is through science and trying to develop technology for the future that is going to be more sustainable, maybe cleaner energy, and things like that. So it's like, yeah, like all these things do connect and are kind of a part of what we do and how we engage in the world. And I think just Catholic contributions to science have been massively significant over the
And
centuries.
what a great way to challenge the dichotomies of the world sometimes, where it's like it's either or so often, and it's making science into a religion a lot of times, where this is the ultimate questions and it solves all things.
Right.
No, that's science is a tool. It's a frame of reference. It is how do we study what we can touch and measure. But there's much more to life than what we can touch and measure. And where do those questions even come from? They come from lived in the world experience. They come from questions of faith. And hopefully our science informs our religion informs our science. I think it goes back to your teaching non-science majors. It's an opportunity to engage people outside of their field to challenge the way that they're thinking. And I think that's really wonderful. And I think it's something. I teach theology, and that's kind of of course Father does that. And it doesn't really have a chance to reach beyond. But I also teach film, and that's a really interesting thing where you say, I just love art, and I love beauty, and I love storytelling. And it's not directly related to my vocation, and yet how could you separate it from my vocation? And I think it's the same with science.
No, there's a lot of really great things there. And think about, like, even amongst the friars kind of now, there's a few of us who work in this area. I think a couple of friars out west who work in environmental science, and Jim Lockman's a great friar who, like, he does environmental restoration as his job. That's his kind of career as a friar. And it's
what does that look like? What sort of is his day to day?
No, he's like kind of a field worker of out in California, of environments that may have gone through some kind of transformation at some point. California has these laws of if they build infrastructure that goes through an ecosystem, they have to replace that ecosystem somewhere else. And so he gets a lot of kind of funding from that to help redevelop some of these things. And I think a lot of the context, and I've been able to talk with some of these guys about this, is when I was working in San Francisco and really started to think about, like, okay, what's next, and going back, and just starting school in Chicago, and kind of what I would need to do as part of my formation. A friar I was talking to, he's like, well, all the stuff they're talking about, like, what are you going to do for the poor? And like, at the end of the day, this kind of work, and it's like, oh yeah, I do have to really think about this. And I think that was really a moment for me of looking at sustainability, clean environments, kind of a sustainable future for all. And I think we're so blessed that as Franciscans, that we've been kind of challenged by Pope Francis in his encyclicals of, like, inspired by Francis of Assisi, your founder, like, this is the kind of stuff you need to be doing, like looking at ideas like integral ecology, which is responding to, one, the cry of the earth right now and the cry of the poor, that our social and environmental worlds are very deeply interconnected, and solutions in one area really need to truly be good solutions, need to be solutions for all people. And so I'm very fortunate I get to spend a lot of time looking at that stuff and doing research on it, working with students on it, and presenting some of those ideas in the class of, like, I'm talking about the science, and we have this technology, and, like, here's how it works, but how do we implement this, and what are the impacts of doing that? Who does it affect?
I'm curious then,
and how does it
along
affect?
the lines, what do you think of AI? And I don't mean AI as, like, students are using it to cheat on their tests. I mean from an environmental impact of the computer processing that's required, the buildings that are being required to be built to hold all this processing. It seems to me that it's using a lot more energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
What can you say about this, and what are the impacts of the future?
Yeah, AI needs to, I think it's a very helpful tool. I actually encourage my students to use it as a tool and try to teach them how to use it properly, and it should be used give me this information, then you don't even look at it, you don't wrestle with it. And
that's a problem.
But I think the energy impacts need to definitely be considered of these facilities that are kind of running these servers, running these kind of data centers is becoming a very common word in the lingo now, is they require a ton of energy. And I think part of the question that we need to start looking at this is, when are we going to be satisfied with how much AI can do? And then shift the focus to, how do we make it run better, faster, more efficient? And it's with doing kind of maybe what it does now, or what we can be able to get it to do in a year or two from now. And, like, at some point, I think we're going to have to stop and say, okay, we're satisfied with what it does. How do we make this run better, using less energy, less? I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot, but these really large computer systems run so hot and with so much energy, you actually need water to cool them. It's like we're used to that like annoying little fan turning on in our laptops to cool it down when we're on a Zoom meeting and it's running too hot. And but no, like we actually have to run water through these to kind of get that. So it's water usage as well. So like in the Northeast, that's not something that's talked about a lot because it's one of the biggest freshwater areas in the world. But when you go out to places in like the Southwest and the West, like water's a major concern.
Yes,
So
the valley
it's-
is not.
Yeah.
It's not
So
filled with water.
Yeah, I think we need to definitely consider that in the future. I know with just our energy system, our electrical grid, and the whole big picture, it's a major question because there's a lot of putting a lot of these data centers in, putting a lot of these servers in, puts a major strain on our electric system to the point a lot of companies are building their own power plants right next to these places. And
It's crazy.
I know, out west, I think Meta is doing a lot of geothermal energy, some like small nuclear things to develop their own energy. I know
So Zuckerberg
Microsoft
has nuclear power. That's
Right.
that's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, Microsoft
Nuclear
bought
warfare
3
coming
Mile
from-
Island recently,
Yeah.
which is a controversial part of our nuclear energy history here in the U.S. and how that was. I think we avoided a major disaster there, but how it was handled is quite controversial. So
Well,
it's
you touched on something I think is the more challenging part. So you said, yeah, we need to make it more efficient. We need to make it faster and use less energy. But the first thing you said, I think you're asking too much, which is for us to be satisfied. Isn't that
No,
isn't that
that's-
ultimately the problem when we talk about green things?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we need to be more efficient. Yeah, we can get on. But who's asking the question, do I even need this in the first place?
Yeah.
And that seems like an impossibility for our world, especially a capitalistic world that is always wanting more and more and more. Once you get to some place, isn't someone going to say, yeah, but I could get more?
Listen,
Yeah.
I just started using DeepSeek yesterday, and
no.
so you're asking me, to let go of that? I don't know. I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
So they're an interesting they're one of the first groups to figure out, how do we do this faster and more efficient with technology that doesn't take as much energy?
Yeah.
And everyone's looking at that group that's like, how did they do this?
Yeah, for
And I
a
was like, they're
fraction of the
better.
cost.
It's like they're better at coding than we are. That's how they did it.
And
and it's like someone was asking me about that the other day. I was like, yeah, they wrote more efficient code, and that makes a huge difference. And I know it was always the struggle when I was in school of doing coding assignments, and depending if you made like small errors or wrote it in a certain way, it could be the difference in your code running in 10 minutes or running in an hour. And it's so we have those kind of challenges. So like really good coding becomes a big part of how this is done well, and it's like, when do we start looking at that versus how
Well,
much
we will
more
get
can we
there.
get this to do? And like
I have no doubt that we'll get better. But I think where we go back to you saying, you're a theologian and a scientist, you bring the two together. The theologian, the pastoral question is, how do we speak to people's hearts and say, but you don't need it. Be satisfied. You already have enough. That's not a scientific question, and that's not an American question, but I think that's ultimately where we are, and particularly where we are as Franciscans, to say, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's not why God gave us this stuff.
Yeah, especially one of the things that drives me kind of crazy with AI is AI generated art and the images,
Oh.
and it's
They're awful,
one, they're
too.
awful,
Yeah.
and then two, like those use so much more energy, like a lot of energy compared to like simple text prompts and stuff like that. That's why we get limited on how many of those we can generate. And like I've played around with them a little bit of like, can I get it to create something like interesting for one of my classes to show
tried it for
as like as
thumbnails.
an example, and they're horrible.
Yeah.
Like I try to give these super detailed prompts, and I just get these terrible things back. And it's we were trying to create one for something we do at the Laudato Si Center, and we were playing around trying to recreate an image that we clearly knew came from AI, and it was like, we want to create this like show like the globe, and half of it is like the results of fossil fuel pollution, half of it's like what, like kind of this like dream ideal, like maybe like green future kind of thing. And like it started putting like wind energy on the bad side, and like the fossil fuel plants on like the green side. I'm like, nope, not what we're going for. That's we're gonna have to, and we couldn't get it to a satisfactory like point. So it's like where do we get with satisfaction on this? Of like AI is a really great tool, and is there a checklist of like we want it to be able to do all these things, and we're good and we can move on? And I think that's gonna be a very difficult
go out and touch the grass.
And I don't think anything is gonna stop that from kind of happening and going forward.
There's two things that come to mind, as I'm listening to you speak. There's a video I just watched called something about AI slop, and it's about how AI images are just kind of spamming social media right now, and people are using that to build up sort of fake Facebook accounts, fake Instagram accounts, all these different things. But then also in the earlier days of AI, as AI images were first coming on, there's a YouTube channel that runs sort of a CG company, and it's called Corridor Digital, and they did videos like, hey, how does this work? Hey, let's talk about this. And they approached it kind of scientifically, in the sense where they're like, they explained how it works, they explained the science behind it, the data behind it, and they showed its limitations. And they're like, well, can we, people are talking about this replacing, CG artists and this and that. And they go, can it do that? And so they tried creating movies or images with just AI, and it fell way short. And then they said, well, okay, let's combine it, AI with a CG artist. And they were able to do some really cool things. But you still needed to have technical skill. You still needed to know how to work with CG. You still needed to learn how to edit and Photoshop and all these different things. And I think for a long time still, there's going to be limitations on what it can do on its own. And I think this idea that people have, like, oh, I can just enter this prompt and it'll do it for me, it's going to do something subpar. It's going to do something mediocre. If you want to make it great, if you want to still create good art, you're still going to need people behind it to work with it, to refine it. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, like how limited it actually is.
Yeah, I loved, someone gave an analogy or an example a few weeks ago. Yes, it's much faster, and the processing power is much better than our brains in some way. You can do 7,000 things a second. But it said, how many images would you need to see of a dog before you understood what a dog was? Maybe 5. Like you're like, oh, okay, I get it. 4 legs, kind of scruffy, and I can distinguish that from a raccoon. I can distinguish that from other things. AI needs 5,000.
Yeah.
And still sometimes it makes mistakes. And so there's something really amazing about it, but also something very not human and not conscious, where it's still, why did you put the windmill on the bad side? And why are there 6 fingers on that hand? I don't get how you don't get these basic details.
Right. Yeah. This is a human hand. It has this many fingers.
Teeth that look like Dracula.
Yeah, those were especially the early images when those were kind of coming to the forefront, using just seeing hands with 8 fingers on them, and just these ridiculous things. And it's the rest of the image looks so good, and then you miss this really clear detail, and it's what's happening with that, and it's
with no variation. It's not like there are some people with 10 fingers and some people with 4. This is always the case.
Yeah. And some of them, they're terrible with words. You'll say, make an image with this phrase or this word in it, and it will still mess it up somehow.
Oh, yeah.
It's make an image with the name Hannah, and Hannah has 2 ends. It will give you a Hannah with 4 ends,
Spelling is tough.
What are you
doing? The
doing?
other thing is citations. It will lie to me.
Yeah.
I will say, find a direct quote from Pope Francis on this topic, and it'll give a quote, and then I will search that quote, and it will be nowhere on the internet.
Yeah.
And I will say, where did you get this quote from? And they said, it's a paraphrase of a couple different things. I said, no, I asked for exact quote. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, let me try again. And it will paraphrase again.
Yeah.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do find it's easier if you say, is there a quote? Because it will always try to obey your prompt. And if you say, find this, and it interprets your prompt literally and there isn't something that quite fits it, it will make something up for sure.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge with it is kind of how it operates, how it's designed to operate, and it's designed to what are the most probable next words. It's so sometimes we try to use it as a search engine, and that's not quite how it's designed. It's gotten a little bit better, but I think especially on my side and working with some of my students, the fun thing for me is that these AI models are abysmal at math.
Yeah, yes.
So it will just sometimes it'll give you kind of the right process of how to go through something and do something, and then it'll give you a bunch of numbers that are just nonsense.
Yeah, it looks right. It fools me.
So some of the newer models are getting a little bit better at it, and I watched one of these things take a question, explain how to go through it, then it wrote traditional computer code to calculate the answer, ran the code, it calculated it, and then gave me the answer. I was like, it got it right. I was like, oh no. I was like, it's actually getting good at this stuff now.
Oh no, I'm being replaced.
Yes, it's all part of it. So it's
AI obviously a big question, but not specifically to you. I mean, you're thinking about energy engineering. What's your 10-year Friar plan?
Yeah,
you're working there for a year. You're about to be solemnly professed, which is very exciting. So you're currently simple profession. You have ordination plans. You have professor plans. Do you have world domination plans? What's ahead for you? Big picture.
Yeah, world domination. No.
Of course, yeah.
Very Franciscan of us. But looking ahead, I know I'm here for the year. The next steps are not always super clear. I think that part of our life is that we are itinerant, and we do take a vow of obedience. So sometimes we're asked to go do things, and that could always kind of happen. And I always try to stay open to that. I know there's been a lot of conversation with some other friars and some of the friars in administration. I'd really like to go back and do a PhD at some point, looking deeper into the kind of on the research side of some of these areas of what do new sustainable technologies look like this, and particularly what might be effects on poor communities that often either aren't given the opportunities for these technologies or do not have access or are impacted negatively by need for materials, need for manufacturing. And so I want to take a look at some of that stuff as well. And so hopefully being able to go back at some point and do that. And I really love education, love working with the students, and it's amazing being on the side of it in this year and seeing is being in the classroom's fun and lecturing and talking and building class conversation. But some of the best moments that I've gotten to have, at least on the education side, is there's 4 or 5 students in my office who are trying to work through a problem. There's it's the night before. This drives my students crazy, but I always love it. I don't call them tests or exams, but they're learning opportunities. So, it's an homage to one of my professors from St. Bonaventure who retired, and he would always call them that too, because he always they're
Don't
less
forget, you have a
threatening.
learning opportunity on Friday.
Yes, and so it'll be the night before learning opportunity, and I have 10 people in my office trying to review and go over things, and I think those are always really fun kind of moments. And so I really, really enjoy that a lot, and I've enjoyed the work that I do here. So if I get asked, it's oh well, I really like what I do right now, so that'd be great. But sometimes there's needs and asks, and I think I always like to remind everybody that obedience and obedere, it's listening, and good listening's and mainly for us, a 3-way street. But the Holy Spirit is our first obedience, and then it's to one another. And it's so I always like to have people keep that in mind as we have these conversations. And I'm sure you guys have experienced that as well as you've been doing this. So it's I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I've always seen that as the beauty of this life. And as I was kind of early in my discernment, I was student St. Bonaventure, and I had this idea of go to St. Bonaventure, get a degree in whatever I want, have fun for a few years, then I was going to go back to my diocese and become a priest. And then I got to see Bonaventure, met the friars, and was like, no, this is really cool. Like, and these guys do so many different things, and there's so much opportunity and variety in the life and living in community. And it was immediately like, oh, no, like this is it. Like this is, like I've had this inkling and kind of this call, and have been exploring that and seeing how the friars like operate, and just the variety of our life is something that's been so fruitful for me, is been able to do this. Like
certainly something we've seen on the show. I mean, every week there's someone with a familiar story, but then doing something completely different. I mean, we had a Chinese spy, we had an accountant, we've got artists, we've got scientists, we've got people who worked in medicine, and yet all have the same vocation.
Yeah, and like I've been in for like 6 years and have lived in like 8 different places and done a whole bunch of different
I
things.
don't like that math.
And I like counting places I've lived like for summers and stuff. I think the number is 8 now.
Wow.
And which is just absolutely wild. Think about it, you meet so many people, see so many different walks of life, and get to work in a bunch of different things. And I think that's a great part of when we think about like our minority. And we go and we work in places, and it's not about what the work is, but the relationships that you form there. That the work is kind of what we get to do, and we work as we're able, and we work as we're gifted, and that's always a great piece of what we're able to do. But like I've been in the Washington D.C. area tutoring elementary kids at reading, which is kind of not my area. They didn't check my SAT reading and writing scores before they gave me that job. That's my numbers are more of my strong suit, but doing things like that, to working on the streets of San Francisco and with people experiencing homelessness or drug addiction, and seeing a lot of things there, to being in Chicago doing like some kind of pastoral ministry type opportunities and music ministry things, to teaching now. And so it's been a whole kind of mixed things even in this very short time, and all wonderful experiences. And I think it's always great to see these different things, because it always draws back to that reemphasis that our life, first and foremost, at the root of everything, is about relationship. So no matter where we are, what we're doing, it's what are kind of the relationships that we have with people. How do we express kind of that gospel way of life, and the love that Christ shows for others, and trying to be witnesses to that.
You know, you mentioned a couple of times, energy and looking at, alternative sources and stuff like that. And I thought about the Kirka Center. Have you been there by any chance?
Yeah.
Have you looked at the posters on the walls?
I haven't got a chance to read through all of them yet, but I know Kirk is a great program here at Siena, giving opportunities for undergraduates to do really high-class research with some of our faculty. And I know there's been a few projects recently on kind of renewable energies. And I think I worked a little bit with a student last summer who was working on it, and he was looking at he's an environmental science student, and he was looking at kind of what's land use involved with things like solar and wind, and are there creative like combinations that might help maximize areas where this is being done. And so it was a really interesting project I got to help him with, and so I know there's been some other good ones. I haven't had a chance to read through all of them yet.
Yeah, there's just a fascinating one on like gravity batteries, and I'm like, and I just, as you were talking, I was thinking about that one that I read and other ones that have been proposed. I just thought that'd be a great resource for you and for students. It's I worked with Kirka to help create the Beverage Institute, which is a whole different thing. But it's just a great resource.
Yes, always about the beer and whiskey.
Science has its purposes.
It does.
Yes. Can't just be theory. Can't just be equations. What are we going to drink from it?
So that's an important part of our history. Is at an event in Chicago. It was this like really nice dinner, and as a fundraiser, there was a few of us friars there and enjoying a beer, and one of the wait staff comes up, it's like, oh, like you, like all you monks, like you guys drink? And we're like, and Tyler Grudai, one of my classmates, both a Bonaventure classmate and Friar classmate of mine, just looks at it. He's like, like we might not have invented it, but we did perfect it.
Tell me you know nothing about friars and
right.
religious life. without telling me you don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So it's so a fun learning opportunity. Like we're not just like we take part in kind of the world around us and are a part of this experience, and we're human. And I think sometimes that can get lost a little bit under the habit. And it's to be able to share some of those kind of human story, and like we enjoy things because it is good. It is given from God and used appropriately. It is all good.
Yeah, we love beer. We love basketball. We love taking our science and taking it to the world. It's not for its own sake, but how does it affect the poor? How does it affect the environment? That sense of beauty, I think, pervades it all. Yeah. And I love to see someone like yourself involved in this, because I'm interested in science, but I've got no scientific skill whatsoever. I don't have the attention or the processing power in my brain to answer the big questions that you're looking at. So thank you so much for being our representative for that. I hope the rest of the year goes well, and you get a new assignment, or you keep the same assignment coming up with Solemn Profession. But know of our prayers, know that you're doing great work, and you got the rest of your friar life ahead of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me to be able to talk about some of this stuff. And it's always like I could talk for hours and hours and hours about all of this. So I know we have to get cut off at some point, but thank you so much for.
It's good to be passionate about something.
Yeah. And thanks for coming on.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Peace.
All right, talk to you.
Tito, did you ever want to be a scientist?
Actually, yeah.
Yeah?
When I was a kid, I loved...
Bill Nye the Science Guy?
I did. I also loved astronomy. And I remember...
Aries,
my mom,
Pisces, Gemini, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, from the constellations perspective. But but I remember my mom was kind of surprised because my uncle, who I didn't really know that well at the time, he's an astrophysicist. And so she's like, oh, he does astronomy, and I bet Tito would like to get to know him. And so, I did, and she connected us, and he would always kind of encourage me in my study of astronomy. And while that did sort of, it no longer became my path, like I didn't feel like I was being pulled in the direction to study science, my appreciation for it has always remained. I still like reading journal articles. I still like learning about what's coming out, what's new in technology. I track whenever we're launching something to the moon or to Mars. So
sure.
I love
a lot of my
stuff.
YouTube and TikTok, I'll get science videos. Yeah. And for me, it's not so much that I want to solve things or I want to have this specific answer to something. It's kind of the opposite in that it unlocks mystery for me.
Yeah.
It allows me to go deeper and show all the things I don't know. And so some of these scientists who can just blow up everything that I think I know and to say, well, actually, there are things we don't know and we're still searching. And I think science at its best is not a self-contained, we have all the answers and this is all you'll need. I think it points out all the things we don't know. And I think that's beautiful about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just sent you a clip from Star Talk the other day. Both of us were like, I can't wrap my head around this.
Yeah, and you had sent something I had seen a couple days before, and I had said to you, yeah, I stopped watching after 15 minutes. When Neil deGrasse Tyson said he was confused, I was like, I got no chance. I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think it's his reaction and my reaction. I was like, this is incredible. I mean, they're talking about people in motion experiencing or witnessing different, like looking up at the sky at the same time, but seeing different moments.
Millions of light years away.
Yeah.
Seeing something from a different perspective.
That's incredible to me, even though they're looking at the same time, because they're in motion and in different directions.
Even if
they're
from
actually,
the same location, that was the idea. They would see things differently.
I just think that's really cool. And when I had someone ask me one time, like, hey, what's the deal with religion with religion and faith? And they're like, how can you believe in God and believe in science? And I'm like, listen. My understanding of God, my belief in God is that God is rational. I don't believe in an irrational God, right? And if a rational God were to create a world, the world would be rational and therefore understandable. And my seeking to understand the world around me is a good and holy thing in that I understand God in a new way. I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. I see them as really interwoven.
For sure. Yeah. God's fingerprints are everywhere. It's not that we can measure God himself, but we know where he's been and what he's doing. And just like an artist has different tells, we can look at the world and say, I think I understand a little bit, at least, of the mind of God.
Yeah, exactly.
Tito, it's great talking to you. Great talking to Jimmy.
Yeah.
So many big mysteries out there. It's so easy to want to be a main character.
It's true.
But remember that we are minor characters in this world. Go out and do the best we can.
And this month, Florida's the main character.
Boo.